Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be talking about anime episodes 159 through 161, which will cover manga chapters 245 through 247. So as you can see here, this is when the anime really starts to throttle the pace, adapting one chapter per episode here, and adding in extra scenes and extending some of those scenes already in the manga canon. However, it's not that bad here, and it doesn't necessarily kill the viewing experience if you don't already know the manga pacing. It's kind of those situations where it's like you don't know what you're missing. And these are still really good episodes, though, and as we see, the Straw Hats are venturing into the dangerous sacred land of the Upper Yard, so there's a lot of exciting things that happen in these episodes. So on to the synopsis. Luffy, Usopp, and Sanji finally make their way into the Upper Yard and are confronted with one of 4 ordeals they must choose from to reach the others. They ultimately choose the Ball Ordeal and have to face down the priest Satori, who seems to wield some kind of power to read movements called mantra that completely dominates the 3 of them. And on the other part of the island, Zoro, Nami, and Robin decide to venture into the island to see what's going on and possibly find this God Enel, while Chopper stays behind with the Going Merry to repair it and guard it. So, like I mentioned in the intro, there are a lot of differences here and some extended scenes. So the first one is actually a pretty funny one that I'm kind of glad they added, was after Zoro swings across and Nami swings and has her terrifying swing across, Zoro kind of adds an extra comment in that conversation where it's like, you probably overswung because you didn't scream, ah, which is a pretty funny scene in and of itself. But I just love how when Zoro gets sort of silly, it's kind of catches you off guard and it's pretty funny. We also get a few scenes where Usopp actually imagines what each ordeal might be like. In the manga, it doesn't really show you this. They just see the 4 gates, and Usopp just kind of gets scared of them. Another change with Usopp is when they're fighting Satori and Usopp comes across those singing birds. In the anime, you actually get to see the return of the Usopp hammer joke with the Wagomu part. And that's actually shown in the anime. While in the manga, it's only very loosely implied that that's how he beats those singing birds, because in the manga, it just immediately cuts to a panel where the birds are defeated and Usopp has the hammer in his hand, but you never actually see a panel where Usopp is screaming, Usopp Hama, and whatnot. So that is a little added detail in the anime, and these kinds of details I actually enjoy. These types of things where they extend scenes where it actually adds something is a good change, and which is why I also don't mind these additional scenes or extended scenes as much. We also get a few added scenes of this little girl running through the forest, as well as Nami noticing the little girl, or at least noticing something running through the forest, and those 2 scenes were not in the manga as well. And then there's a big scene, or a huge chunk of scenes, where the whole ordeal of Chopper dropping the hammer down the stairs, trying to get it back, that's all added. And it actually, so in the manga, the way this plays out is where Chopper makes that startling realization that he is the only one on the boat and he is in the most danger, with that really funny scene with that crazy face he makes. It actually cuts there. And then it launches into this flashback of them deciding how to use the whistle, which is in the manga. But this flashback is also extended a little bit, and you get to see a little bit more of the beginning of it. Whereas in the manga, you kind of cut right to the fact where they're trying to debate, who gets to keep the whistle. And then the last 2 scenes of episode 161, where Nami is being saved by Zoro and Robin, as well as the scenes of Luffy and Usopp continually getting beat up by Satori, those scenes are also added to sort of bookend that episode. Alrighty, so my thoughts. So the Luffy trio make their way into the Upper Yard, but find the Milky Road River is riddled with traps and have to paddle like crazy to avoid them. Meanwhile, we catch up with the others on the sacrificial altar, and they're surrounded by some kind of a moat full of cloud sharks. And then Zoro has to save Chopper as he falls down the altar steps and is almost eaten by one of those giant cloud sharks. This scene is pretty badass, as Zoro freaking takes on one of these things underwater most of the time, while constantly straddling the line between being eaten and fighting off its jaw. And there's this funny moment where Zoro doesn't surface for a while, and Chopper and Nami are afraid maybe Zoro got eaten. But then Robin casually throws in her 2 cents about the situation, and with her calm, morbid comments about how if Zoro was actually eaten, then the cloud water would actually be stained red. And Nami's terrified reaction to this is all too funny. And I think this like running joke of Robin sort of making these calm, rational observations, but saying really morbid and dark things is becoming one of my favorite running jokes of the series. Then to top this pretty hilarious but cool fight off, instead of cutting the shark, Zoro opts to punch it for some reason, and Nami even makes fun of him for betraying his swordsman's honor for punching it instead of actually cutting it with a sword, which is also a nice bit of comedy there. Robin and Zoro try to assess the situation that they find themselves in and wonder if the god's judgment is just to starve them on the altar, but then wonder if really this is the way God is going to punish them. Is God really so bland? But I love just how casual they are about this sort of perceived all-powerful God. Now, my favorite part about this episode, and one of the better, more epic and funnier parts of this entire arc, is Zoro's sort of flippant attitude towards God in general, especially the part where Nami asks, "What are you going to do even if you meet that terrifying guy? We can't make God angry, it's just common sense." And Zoro's response is absolutely legendary. I love this scene so much. I remember reading this back in the day, and it's always stuck with me. He just coolly turns back to Nami and says, "My bad, but I've never prayed to God," which is quite literally the coolest response there, and clearly Chopper agrees as he lights up screaming, "Whoa, so cool!" right next to him in disbelief at the idiocy of Nami is so funny. But yeah, this scene is just too good. It's so good. So after investigating the altar a bit more and discovering that it's more than 1,000 years old, Robin wants to go out and investigate and see what other historical sites may be on the island as well, because it's becoming a very curiously historical and archaeological expedition now for her. I think one of the great things about the beginning of Skypiea is this ongoing mystery and discussion over whether there really is a god or it's just some being that's really powerful. But given all the clues so far, it's quite hard to pin down, as whoever it is seems to have immense power and an ability to be omniscient and attack whenever and wherever he wants without being seen. And yeah, Oda is just so good at building up his major villains, because it really sets up Enel to be this sort of insane villain. Like, it's like, how do you top Crocodile? But now he's got a villain that's almost a literal god. We don't know that for sure yet, but he's got the powers to sort of seemingly make it look like he is. But anyways, Zoro and Robin decide to go out and explore the forest, as Robin wants to explore the potential archaeological sites that may be there. And after assessing the altar, Nami also wants to join upon hearing that these sites may also contain treasure, possibly. And I love how Nami's eyes turning into berries is actually visible in world to Chopper. And it's not just a comic book gag that Chopper can physically see Nami's eyes shaping into the berries sign, which is pretty funny in and of itself. And as if that wasn't funny enough, we get another amazing Zoro moment as he gets ready to swing across the moat. He clears his throat so that he can do a traditional Tarzan call as he swings across. And the fact that Zoro has this sort of silly childish side is so fun to see, that underneath that sort of stoic exterior, he's actually just as similar to the other guys on the crew, even though he doesn't quite show it as much. But he can be almost just as silly as like Usopp, Luffy, Chopper, and even Sanji to an extent as well. And then the scene where Nami also takes her swing on the vine, this is actually way funnier in the anime, as they animate her terrified swing much better, and they add this little bit of extra dialogue, as I mentioned in the differences section, about how she had trouble because she didn't scream, "Ah!" It's like, where does this even come from? It's so random, yet it's so funny. Chopper is left to guard and fix the Mary up by himself while they wait for Luffy and company to arrive. Then we get another moment that I find so funny with Chopper. At first, he's all calm and he gets to be safe on the ship, and he's actually worried about the others' safety. But then he slowly comes upon the realization that because Zoro and Robin went with Nami and left him behind, he's now left on the ship by himself. And he comes to this shocking realization that he's actually the one that's in most danger now. And that shocked face he makes as he thinks to himself, I'm the one in most danger here. It's just so amazing. I mean, it's just like, poor Chopper. But yeah, as we go back to the Luffy trio, they find themselves floating towards 4 big gates labeled with the Swamp Ordeal, Ball Ordeal, Steel Ordeal, and the String Ordeal. But yeah, I can't be the only one that kind of immaturely chuckles at Ball Ordeal. And funnily enough, because it sounds the least threatening of the 4, they actually choose this one. As they make their way through the cave, Luffy mentions what if there are correct and incorrect choices in the gates, and if they choose the wrong one, they may just go careening back down to Earth. And Usopp is obviously terrified of this prospect, but Sanji immediately is dismissive of it. But before he can even finish his sentence, they exit the cave and find themselves floating in midair about to fall. And this scene is so freaking funny. The faces they all make here are just the absurdest to the max, and especially Usopp's face, whose face has already begun to drop, but his eyes and teeth pop out, and they hang in midair as if they're trying to stay above. And I laugh so hard at this scene every time. The other genius thing about this sequence is that if you look closely at the right to the other 3 paths, their Milky Road flows, normally adding to this idea that they may have actually chosen a wrong path. But it turns out they're okay, as Luffy's just laughing at the fact that even he scared himself a bit, and Sanji's just pissed. Him being pissed is so entertaining as hell, as he is understandably pissed after having that thought planted in his head by Luffy. And one thing I appreciate about Luffy is for a moment he legit thought he was gonna die, but damn it, if he had fun doing it. He's not only laughing as they are about to drop, and he's still laughing after they land. And it kind of calls back to the scene where he almost gets killed in Logtown, where he's still laughing. And yeah, this scene also kind of represents that fact that, yeah, he almost died here, or at least he thought he might die, and yet he's still going out smiling and laughing. But they find themselves safe after the massive cliff drop, and they are now in another section of the Milky Road surrounded by a bunch of random cloud balls floating around everywhere. Luffy at first hypothesizes that maybe they picked the right one, and out of the 4, one of them was the correct quote-unquote safe choice, but boy does he turn out to be very wrong, as all the balls contain some sort of a dangerous surprise in them, and each time they're touched, they spring forth a new trap. After succumbing to a couple ball traps, the priest of the Ball Ordeal shows himself finally, and he's the round, creepiest looking one out of the 4 priests that we saw earlier, who calls himself Satori. It starts to become clear what the Ball Ordeal is, as they have to worry about not only fighting Satori, but also the balls themselves in order to get out of the ordeal. However, Satori proves to be more fearsome than his stupid outward appearance and silly demeanor would indicate, as Satori has some weird ability called mantra to read his opponent's actions before they do them. In addition, he has an ability called impact that seems to hit them with shockwaves that hits them internally, which allows him to actually do physical damage to Luffy's rubber body, making him an incredibly formidable opponent, even if it is 3 vs 1. Luffy, however, wants to take him on one-on-one, and he has Usopp and Sanji go after the Karasumaru, except he continues to get his ass completely handed to him. At this point, it seems like he doesn't stand a chance, and the stakes have been set incredibly high, and they are very tense for this battle. I always feel like this fight seems to get crapped on a lot, but I actually really enjoy it because it's actually one of those fights where you kind of feel like this is really threatening, and it's not one of those like easy fights where it's like, oh, Luffy and Sanji are both there. This is going to be a cakewalk, but both of them struggle pretty hard. And another thing I wanted to mention is mantra is a very interesting ability, to say the least, because it doesn't seem like it's a martial arts thing where he's reading their movements or attacks. The way he recites what they're going to do makes it almost seem like telepathy, as if he's reading their thoughts. It'll be interesting to see if it's revealed how this trick or ability works later on. I'll probably talk about this a little bit more in the spoiler section. I think one of the reasons why this fight, though, is kind of looked down upon is Satori himself. Because I gotta say, Satori does make a good villain, if only for the fact that you just freaking hate this guy. Like, he is so annoying. And his design is really irritating, too, for some reason. He's just so cocky, yet he's got this, like, silly and stupid attitude with his annoying ability to completely nullify our hero's attacks constantly with the mantra, and that laugh. God, that stupid laugh, that ha ha ha. I mean, you personally just want to bash this guy's face in, probably more so even than the characters themselves. Before episode 160 ends, though, we catch up with Chopper again freaking out on the Going Merry about being left alone, but spurred by Zoro's words, he relaxes himself a bit and begins to fix the ship to show his crew that he's a capable member of the crew. And it's a pretty cute scene. We then catch back up with the Usopp and Sanji part of the fight, and now they're trying to catch up with the Karasumaru to avoid losing it, but Luffy doesn't seem to stand a chance against Satori, and Satori now turns his attention to Sanji and Usopp, which I've got to talk about for a moment here because it seems crazy to me, and probably most of the viewers/reader, that Luffy would be getting his ass handed to him by a guy like this. I mean, think about it. This guy has some crazy weird powers that may or may not be a devil fruit, but when I first read this, I personally didn't think it was a devil fruit. Just by the way it's presented, it just didn't seem to have that sort of theming that most devil fruit powers have. And usually they're revealed pretty early on in the fight that if they have a fruit, that they just mention what it is. And I don't know what, that's just the sense that I got. But then to have this ridiculous guy absolutely rocking 2 of the 3 monster trios, including Luffy, is incredible. And I think it does set up some crazy expectations for the rest of the arc, because if this guy is this strong, just how strong are the other priests, and how strong is Enel? I mean, those other 3 priests already look more intimidating than Satori. And then there's Enel as a whole nother beast. It's just, it sort of raises the expectation and the stakes of this arc to see, like, how are they going to get out of this? And what if the others run into one of these priests? And of course, I'm pretty sure Oda did this intentionally to start us off with the most absurd and silly looking one in Satori to set the threat level expectation. And then whenever we see the priests from here on out, whenever they show up, that we should be scared of these guys, which in turn sets our expectations up for, again, how strong Enel is. If the priests are this formidable, just think, well, how the heck are they going to beat God Enel? And I think it's just, it's genius writing setup. But going back to Usopp and Sanji, one thing I had to mention about this scene, because it always gets a pretty good chuckle out of me, although I will admit the joke is a bit lost in translation, but when Satori launches a ball at Sanji but then ricochets it off of another ball to catch Usopp off guard, he lets go of the branch in fear and exclaims, "He was aiming for me!" But the reason this is so funny for Japanese audiences is because the way he says it is in this sort of formal, proper Japanese keigo. So like I mentioned in past episodes, in Japanese there are different sort of ways of speaking based on what kind of formality you're in, whether it be casual, formal, whether you're talking to a subordinate or a superior and whatnot. But most of the time, One Piece is spoken in a very like casual, almost like slang kind of, Japanese, because obviously they're pirates. They don't really care about speaking very formally and whatnot, aside from the Marines. But yeah, so Usopp actually says, "Nerai wa ore deshita." And the deshita suffix is something you really only add when you're talking in a somewhat more formal setting. And normally in One Piece, they're very casual, and so like the sentence would be more like "Nerai wa ore datta" or "Nerai wa ore da," and so you don't have that deshita part at the very end of the sentence. So just hearing Usopp freaked out that it made him all of a sudden speak in this formal tone is just freaking hilarious to hear. And to cap it off, he gets freaked out for nothing, as it turns out to be a dud, and it doesn't even do anything to him, and he just careens to the ground again. And then, the montage of them being attacked by the balls is pretty entertaining, as we get a third callback to the Usopp hammer, Usopp rubber band joke. However, the best part is the whole vine swinging scene, and it's unsurprising that many of the Straw Hat crew share similar interests without even really having mentioned it. And one thing I love is how independently of each other, Luffy and Zoro both have this sort of deep-seated desire to swing on vines and yell, "Ah!" But then, to add a third layer to this joke, Usopp not only is inspired by seeing Luffy swing around, he whips out his new gadget. But the most hilarious part about this whole thing is that Usopp also independently of the other two had this desire too, as he's already had this elaborate device to swing around and has dubbed it the Usopp, and that's the actual name of the thing, which is absurd. And Sanji, confused, just responds, "What the hell is that?" I just think all three of them having the same random desire to swing and scream, ah, is freaking hilarious. Like, Oda is just too much with these cascading jokes. The funny thing is, this joke isn't even over. This is a joke that keeps on giving. As Usopp uses the Usopp, ah, to swing to the Karasumaru, it blares this epic action music as he swings right for the Karasumaru, looking like he's gonna hit it dead on. But he forgets the rope is attached to the belt and he can't actually get it unhooked. And he can't get down. But as if that's not enough, his triumphant turns into the It's like this pathetic whimpering. Then Luffy joins him, thinking Usopp is just having fun like him. But Sanji's had enough. And his calm, I need a quick word with you two, as he proceeds to beat them up for their stupidity, is so funny. Like I said, Usopp is a master at layering these jokes in succession, and I love how he keeps building upon them, and it just becomes more and more funny. And like I said, like I think one of the strengths of this Skypiea arc is literally how funny it is. There's so many funny jokes in the Skypiea arc that a lot of later arcs just kind of are missing, and I actually really enjoy rereading and rewatching Skypiea just for the jokes, because they're just so funny. But anyways, now that Sanji's got them back on track, they try to strategize, but Satori shows up and blows a heavy impact right into Sanji's chest, causing him to spit up blood and go down hard. This moment is pretty big, as Sanji seemed to be the only one actually with the brains among the three who might actually be capable of coming up with a plan to beat Satori, and just as they were regrouping, Satori takes him out, which creates an even more desperate and tense situation now. And I will say, I like how this moment is portrayed in the manga a bit more. There's not really much that's actually changed, but the tone and intensity of the hit, it hits differently. So in the anime, as they're talking, it's a bit slower paced and less shocking, as Sanji is discussing his ideas that if they all gang up on him at once, they might be able to beat him. But Satori then yells at them, "Beat me?" And the three are confused as to where he is. Then Satori jumps down at them, and there's even this pause before Sanji actually gets blasted with the impact attack, which is fine and all, and it gets the point across, but the direction of this scene in the manga with just a few tweaks is even more intense. So in the manga, this scene is played out way faster and hits a lot harder, as Sanji doesn't even get to finish his sentence about his strategy to gang up on Satori, and all of a sudden in the next panel, Satori is just instantly in front of him and already blasting the impact at his chest. And the way it's drawn, the impact looks like it hits so much harder than that sort of slow burst that's shown in the anime. Not only that, but the amount of blood that gushes out of Sanji's mouth is increased as well to really sell how much internal damage he took, really giving you the sense that he may actually be down for the count, at least for this fight. And it just helps to add to Satori's threat and raises that tension even more, as now Usopp and Luffy may have to face Satori without the help of Sanji's sort of strategizing. And we know both of them are not exactly the smartest combat strategists, so it creates a bit of a more dire situation for them. Then weirdly in the anime, we get this random scene of this little girl running through the forest, excitedly gathering dirt, or I guess to them, verth. And I'm honestly not sure why this scene was inserted here, as this doesn't become relevant for at least another several episodes. And really, it's completely unnecessary here. And it just sort of cuts away from the action, and it's really disorienting, really. And it's obviously there just to pad out time, which is kind of unfortunate. We catch back up with Chopper as he remembers that he has the whistle that Gunfall left in case there's actual real danger. And then we get a short flashback that extends that moment shortly after they got the whistle, where Luffy tried to immediately blow it again because he wanted to see the Sky Knight again. And we see Luffy along with the coward trio, quote unquote, who gets to keep the whistle. And Luffy's reasoning being he just wants to blow the whistle to see the night again, while the other three argue over who's the weakest, with Robin seeing this and commenting, "You guys have some strange arguments." Because I'm sure Robin, having jumped from one intense pirate crew to the next, criminal organization, she's probably used to seeing people trying to assert their dominance and arguing who's actually the strongest or who deserves treasure the most. But the Straw Hats are arguing who the weakest and most pathetic in the crew is. And seeing Robin experience this odd sight is pretty funny. And I also love that once they decide to hang the whistle on the mast and is only to be used in emergencies, But Nami goes even further than that to forbid the 4 strong members of the crew from using it and makes sure they know they'll be punished by Nami if they do. And their collective ambivalent, we understand, is also pretty funny to me too. Chopper then puts the whistle around his neck to reassure himself and says it's only to be used as an absolute last resort. But then almost immediately one of the priests show up, the one with the spear and scary ass bird, and says, "Dang, the only sacrifice I can kill is just you." And I kid you not, this scene makes me bust out laughing so hard. Even though I'm scared for Chopper, the immediate yet slow turn of his freaked out face with the bulging veiny eyes is so funny. I mean, Oda tries to convey this in the manga in one panel by layering his expressions in the sequence, but this is just made for the anime. Like, this scene is perfect for the anime. The way the anime director decided to repeat this 3 times with more and more increasing close-ups as was a stroke of genius. And the way his eyes just continue to bulge out as he tries to blow the whistle. It's just so funny going from only in last resort to not even 30 seconds to just outright, I gotta blow the whistle. And poor Chopper, he now has to fend off a freaking priest by himself, at least until Gunfall can reach him. And that's where the episode ends. You know, these priests can't even be beat 3-on-1 with Luffy and Sanji as part of a group. Now Chopper has to fight one off by himself. It's just, yeah, you don't know how he's going to win this fight. But we'll have to see on the next podcast. But yeah, things are getting pretty intense for 2 out of the 3 groups, with Luffy and Usopp having no idea how to beat Satori and continually taking a beating from him. And now Chopper is faced with trying to take on a priest by himself too. It's like, yeah, if Luffy and company can't beat one, how is Chopper going to beat him? It's pretty insane stuff. And yeah, I honestly can't wait to talk about the next few episodes as well on the next podcast. But I will leave that here. If you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates of when I post new episodes or see some pictures. Also, stay tuned for a very short spoiler section, as I just want to talk about one thing, which is mantra. But if you don't want to stay for that, I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope to see you on the next episode. See ya. Alright, so this is going to be a really short spoiler section, but Satori's mantra, or mantra in general, obviously we now know that it is a form of haki and basically our first real indication of future sight, you know, something that we don't actually get to see really named and fleshed out until Whole Cake Island when Luffy is fighting Katakuri. And yeah, it's interesting how, I don't know, this has always been a pretty hotly debated thing among the community, whether Oda actually had the whole mechanics for haki out way in the beginning with Shanks and him using Conqueror's haki, and then Zoro with the breath thing against Mr. One or Des Bonus, and then here with mantra. I think by the time he got to this point, he had some idea of what haki was going to be, because it just seems like too much of a coincidence that it ties together so well. But yeah, it's interesting just to see now, you know, having read Whole Cake Island and then having seen this, you're just like, okay, yeah, this is definitely haki and an observation haki and sort of the first incarnation of future sight. And I don't know this personally myself. I haven't really looked into it, nor have I really done too much thought around it. But I always felt like mantra is sort of a weaker form of future sight. Like, future sight almost seems like you can see into the future, whereas mantra still seems like it's just reading the person. You're just reading their thoughts about what they're going to do, whereas future sight seems to almost actually be seeing what's happening. Like, you can visualize what's actually happening instead of just sort of reading the person's thoughts. That's just how I always interpreted it. So it's we have mantra, and then future sight is sort of the evolution of that. But yeah, I always thought that was really interesting, and just wanted to mention that here. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this spoiler section. But yeah, I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening. Bye.